The past week has seen the creative industry come under the spotlight due to funding issues related to COVID-19. Artists have been staging a sit-in at the National Arts Council due to the presidential employment stimulus program that was meant to get creatives back to doing what they do best: creating, producing and working. But it has not gone according to plan, with the NAC announcing that it had erroneously allocated more money to the approved arts projects that it had available in its PESP fund. We promised to get the National Arts Council's side of the story, so we invited Dr. Sipho Sithole, who is the National Arts Council member. Dr. Sithole, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us and a warm welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nowan. It's great to talk to you again.
Good to have you back on the show, Dr. Sithole. And it has been a long time, and I'm glad that we finally got you, because this is a very, very important conversation that we should have, especially for the arts fraternity. And so much has been said about the presidential stimulus package. But give us background into what the presidential employment stimulus program is and what its purpose is.
First, let me say, some of us have had an opportunity to look at the global cultural and creative industries environment and how and what countries are doing to assist the creatives during this difficult time. And I must say that we have a government, we have a country that is really, really caring, in the sense that from what I have seen going around in this research I have done, very few countries have actually done what South Africa has done to make available some kind of relief during the this COVID period, to assist the creatives to survive until whenever. We don't know when this pandemic is going to be over us, But as you know, that last year the president announced a presidential employment stimulus package, and the arts and culture was lucky that it also got allocated some money, and particularly the National Arts Council was allocated 300 million rands last year through the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture to then distribute to the creatives who really needed this money. As you and I know that this is a gig economy. People who are in the cultural and creative industries in the main don't have an 8-to-5 job, so they don't have a guaranteed income or a guaranteed check. They rely on the market and the demands for their service or product. So when COVID struck, everything came to a halt. So this 300 million rand is really meant to then provide this much needed relief. But as you are saying, it didn't go as well as planned. And the new council, which started in January this year, had to then inherit a challenge that was just beyond our imagination, where we discovered that much as this PESP had been completed last year by the end of December last year, adjudicated and approved, they had approved more people than the budget itself. They had approved at 1,374 applicants, but there was money available to 613, leaving 761 outside and not being catered for. Yes. I mean, we had to ask ourselves first, how did you decide that this 613 is the one that's going to get the relief, and the 761 that had been approved in a duly constituted panels and approved by the council, the executive, that was up until last year? How did you then decide that the 761 is going to be left out? So those were the problems that we encountered. And when we started probing, we discovered that partly the reason, not that there was enough money to cover 761, because that budget had gone to about 611 million from 300 million rands. But partly the reason was that some of the applicants had been granted more money than they had requested. That was the first thing. We also discovered that there were organizations. One organization had been granted more than one project, and so that is what was the intervention that we had to look at. So we had to come up with very difficult principles, which we had to implement. One was that nobody is supposed to receive more money than they had requested, and two, we had to then say we're going to put a ceiling if we had been approved for in excess of 2 million rand, you will get 2 million, as long as it's compliant and is within the guiding figure. And 3, we then said we're going to adjust the guiding figure, where in instances where National Treasury had said that the guiding figure is 25,000 rand per job created, we revised that to 10,895. So that was the only way that when we did that exercise, everyone that had applied, adjudicated, and approved by the 30th of December needed to get more money. So that alone meant that we had to delay any further distribution of this much needed relief, because we had to readjust the contract, we had to withdraw the grant notification letters. But the one thing that we did was to seek legal counsel to say, can we adjust where letters had been issued? Can we revise the contract? And the legal advice was very clear that everybody that had been adjudicated and approved, and by the 30th of December had to receive the grant. And that the principles of equity, fairness, and administrative justice had to be applied, and also recognizing the constitutional right of those that had been approved and now are left outside.
Dr. Sithole, can the council afford to be making such errors, that more artists are paid over the others, and now there's a shortfall? How did that happen?
The shortfall is exactly what I just explained. One, I think the biggest dilemma that we had as Sipho was that there was a guiding figure of 25, and now I need to explain this. There was a guiding figure of 25,000 rand that came from National Treasury, from what we are told. Remember, we were not there. We've only just come in January. The guiding figure then says, if you have created a job, regardless of what the job, the nature of the job is, that job needed to be paid 25,000 rand. Now, we are already throwing the market, the cultural and creative industries out of kilter, because you and I know that if, let's just talk about music, and a band, a principal artist has secured the services of 6 musicians for a 45-minute gig. The guiding figure really meant each musician, as they finish that gig, they must be paid 25,000 rand. So we would have expected that the people who are in this industry, who were panelists and the council, needed to say, no, this is a guiding figure, but it does not work like that. The average is probably 5,000 or 6,000 rand when an artist, a musician has performed. Yeah. Let us adjust. So it blew out the budget beyond proportion, you know. So even this overpayment, where people were giving more money than they had requested, that was just 27 million rands. So, but the guiding figure was the one that just quadrupled the budget and made it definitely not implementable. So we had to stop it, but we had to then go back and consult. That was more important. We went back and consulted with the industry. To date, we have had 4 virtual meetings with the industry across the country, where we've explained over and over again to say, this was the dilemma that we are facing. And it was our moral obligation not to exclude the 761.
We will discuss the outcomes of those meetings with the creatives in just a moment. But you are quoted as having said that the stimulus program was actually an anomaly, as it was not part of the NEC mandate. Then why did the council agree to do it? As you are rightly saying, this was an intervention of a dilemma that we hope is temporary, that is going to disappear at some point in time. But the fact that people had to eat. This industry employs 1.3 million people across the cultural and creative 7 modes. So when government looked at who are the funding agencies, it became clear that one of those funding agencies will be the National Arts Council. And because it had already done that work last year when the COVID relief was introduced by the Department of Arts, Sport, Arts and Culture by the minister, they had already had the mechanism of doing it. It had to be done. Someone had to do it. Whether you were going to ask IDC or DBSA or BASA, someone had to do it. And the National Arts Council was just the right
want to do, because that's what it does. It administers grants. I mean, every year the NAC gets about 136 million to distribute across all ideas that the industry applies. So there was no way that it wasn't going to do it. It wasn't a normal. It's not an NAC normal grant, but it's there and it had to be done.
Yeah, and in your Zoom, or rather in your virtual meetings with the multiplicity of the artists that you've been engaging, some of these artists have been lamenting that the council wasn't answering some of the key questions that they were asking. For instance, how the budget, how the stimulus package ran out of budget, and how is it legal to change amounts in a signed contract?
Most of the questions that had been asked by the creatives or the practitioners, including the artists that are sitting in at the National Arts Council, are definitely the right questions. These are the same questions that we spent more than a month asking, trying to get to the bottom of it, and we're just not getting the right answers. It meant we needed to probe and have pointed questions. The figures that we are giving to you were as a result of the questions that we had asked. So we are totally aligned with the types of questions that have been asked. And these are the questions that we have sought to resolve. And every day we are beginning to resolve them one by one. For instance, we have started now to roll out the payment. And we are targeting that every approved and compliant applicant that has been issued a grant notification letter and signed a new contract has to be paid at least the first tranche by the 31st of March. The issue around the legality of what we did, we knew that there is a binding contract, there is a binding letter, and some people may have even started planning or implementing the project. But we had to go back to them and speak as South Africans and say, based on the 613 approved that had been published and issued letters, we are only providing jobs to 14,000 people.
Okay. And
at that time, Stats SA had just released its statistics about unemployment figures of 7 million, of which 60% of that was young people.
We're out of time, unfortunately, Dr. Sithole, but just briefly, the Chief Financial Officer, Clifton Changfoot, and Chief Executive, Rosemary Mangope, have been suspended. So what's the state of the investigation and what happens once it's completed?
Well, first of all, they have not been charged. The only thing that they've been suspended for us to be given time and space to investigate the perceived mismanagement and maladministration. And some of them have they've materialized over budget, approving more people than you were supposed to, than the budget you had. So who was at the helm? The CFO and the CEO, and they have to answer. Sooner we will then be completing the investigation. If they've got questions to answer, they will answer. And then that process will be fair and procedural, and then it will conclude itself. It will be totally independent of the NAC.
Okay. And what are you doing to ensure that the same kinds of anomalies or mistakes are not repeated?
This is a learning experience. That's all I can say. This is a learning experience. It's a learning experience not only for the National Arts Council, but for any organization that is tasked with processing applications for funding, deciding who is successful against the budget. It should not have happened. And this council will make sure that in the next 4 years we don't have things like that to happen again.
And are you able to give us a timeline of when new contracts will be given to the artists?
They've been issued. We have issued 1,130 new letters, and we've already begun to receive contracts, about 888 contracts. We are expecting that they will be released, but already we have received 235 out of those. And just as a result of that, we are able to pay 5.6 million in the last 2 days to 52 beneficiaries. And you can see the numbers are increasing now. We have now paid in total 329 beneficiaries in excess of 37 million. So as contracts are coming in, the executive has promised that at least 72 hours they should have made the payment. And we are appealing to everyone who has received a grant notification letter to return it to the NAC signed so that a new contract can be issued. And within 72 hours, the NAC should be able to pay. Our deadline is really the 31st of March that we have paid everyone, at least the first tranche.
All right. Great chatting to you, Dr. Sithole. Thank you so much for your update. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yes.